Have our cinnamon rolls and parfaits, we can get to another exciting final piece of the conference. So it's our closing plenary with presidential address. So it's my pleasure to introduce our closing plenary speaker, Leslie Cornick, who will give the presidential address. I gave her a longer introduction earlier, so I'll be brief this time, and she'll be sharing her journey in more detail as well. So I'll just mention that she recently joined Chico State as the Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs, and before that she was Dean of the School of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics, STEM, at the University of Washington, Bothell, and then Associate Dean before that, Dean of Research and Sponsored Programs before that, and Professor of Marine Biology and Policy prior to that. I do want to underscore and mention again the recognition she has received for inclusive and visionary leadership and collaborative decision-making, and for being a champion of the liberal arts and sciences education. Let's welcome Leslie to the stage.
Thank you, Shaylee, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for sticking around. And hopefully, what I'm going to share with you today will be of some value. But if it's not, that's completely okay too. So normally when we have these closing presidential addresses, we're staying on in the organization as past president. And so I really wanted to think about, since I'm not staying on, since I'm moving away from CCAS after 7 years, which I'm going to try really hard not to cry, I wanted to maybe give a little bit of a glimpse into what my first 10 months as provost has been like, and how I came to this place. And partly because there are so many of you in this organization who I know both have ambitions to go on to further leadership positions, which I fully support and encourage. And sometimes it's kind of nice to have a little peek from the other side. And I also really, there was a lot that I learned while finding my way as a dean and as an associate dean that I really try to pay attention to as I make decisions and work with my deans now in this new role. And so I want to share some things with you from that. And then I think, obviously this week has been important and impactful in our country. And so I do want to share a little bit about meeting that moment and where we go from here in higher education. One of the things that you might remember from my conversation with Lynn earlier in the week was, as we think about how to talk about and change the narrative around not only the ROI value of higher education, but again, the intrinsic value of a liberal arts and sciences education, Lynn thought it was very important to share our origin stories. And so I do want to share a little bit about my origin story with you. I grew up in a very close-knit family. My father grew up in rural Wyoming. He didn't finish high school. He joined the Air Force, and he benefited from the enlisted flight program, which I don't think exists anymore. And so he became a pilot. He retired from the Air Force as a captain and went to work for United Airlines. And so in some ways, I grew up in what would be considered an upper middle class upbringing in Southern California. My mom grew up in rural Oklahoma and moved to Northern California in the late 30s as part of the Dust Bowl migration. And she married at 16, had my sister, and so she never went to college. So she was, home raising me and my brother and my sister. And when I was in junior high, she decided that she was one of the smartest women I know. She's my North Star. And when I was in junior high, she decided that she wanted to go back and get her nursing degree. And so she got her RN degree from Ventura College in Southern California. and went to work as a nurse. A few years later, she got lung cancer. Now, during that intervening time between when she got her RN degree and when she got sick, we had a narrative in our house that my brother and I would go to college. I went, through all the college prep courses. I did advanced placement, and I, got accepted to Cal State Northridge in an impacted business program. That's a whole other story, like about how I got into college. But I was a first-generation student by all accounts, because no one in my family had ever gone to a four-year university, and they hadn't had a four-year bachelor's degree. And in fact, even my extended family on both my mom's side and my dad's side, I was really one of the first. So I was 16 when my mom got sick. I was 17 when she passed away. I was in the middle of my senior year of high school. And as you might imagine, that kind of sent me off the rails for a little while. And I had a conversation with my high school counselor. I was torn at the time between doing marine biology and becoming an actor and going to UCLA with all my theater friends. And the counselor in my high school said, "Oh, honey, girls don't do science. Stick with theater." But by that time, my mom had passed away, and my dad was like, "You are not going to be a theater major. You're going to do something useful," which is how I ended up at Cal State Northridge for a semester in the business program. And I lasted all of one semester because I hated it. I was lonely. I was still grieving, and I wasn't ready. And so I quit school, and I worked, I got married, I did a whole bunch of things. Was smart enough at least to know at that time that I wasn't ready to have children, and so I didn't have that burden on me when I made the decision to go back to school. But I was 23 by the time I really was ready and focused and made the decision to go back to school. I went to 4 different California community colleges. I went to Santa Monica, I went to Glendale, I went to San Diego Community College, and finally I went back home to Thousand Oaks, and I went to Moorpark, and I got my associate's degree from Moorpark. I had terrible advising. I wanted to go to UC Santa Cruz and do their joint bachelor's and master's in marine science, and my counselor at Moorpark said, "Oh, you don't want to go to Santa Cruz. They don't give letter grades." What did I know? So I didn't go to Santa Cruz. So I transferred to UC San Diego, thinking animal science was going to be the degree that I wanted. I wanted to go to Scripps, didn't know that they didn't have an undergraduate program at that time. So just lots of trying to figure this out along the way. And the reason that I share all these details with you is, so many of our students, particularly in the regional publics, are trying to navigate all of this stuff on their own without support from their families, without that background knowledge. And if our systems in our institutions are not solid enough to give them the help that they need and the guidance that they need, and if they don't, I was tenacious. I was like, I am gonna figure this out because I knew my mom wanted me to finish college, and I wanted to finish college, and I wanted to have a career, and I was gonna figure it out come hell or high water. But not all of our students feel that way, or have that ability to feel like they can do it on their own. So I ended up in this animal science major, which turns out was pre-vet. But I got lucky. The anthropology department at UC San Diego had an open house, and there was a faculty member there, and I talked to him about what I wanted to do, and he said, "Come on into anthropology, we are your people." And then I was kind of off to the races at that point, and I went into my master's program, and I went into my PhD program, and everything turned out okay. But I think it's just so important, you know, especially as we're having conversations with legislators, with policymakers, with leaders, with community members, you know, how many of you in the audience were first-generation students? I know there are a lot of you, right? You have an amazing story to share, and you need to share that story. So that's my origin story. When I first came up with the idea for this talk, I had it in my head of the, you know, everything I need to know in life I learned in kindergarten. And so I wanted to share a few things that, you know, as I've progressed through academic leadership, have already been serving me really well in my role as provost. And some of these are going to be painfully obvious to you, but I think all of them bear repeating because that repetition is what helps to solidify things in our daily behaviors. And I struggle with some of these still on a daily basis, especially the first one. And anyone who knows me really well knows this. Listen more, talk less. When I am in my one-on-ones with my direct reports, it's very easy to want to jump in and try to solve their problems for them. And you have to stop and let them process and listen and listen and listen. And especially if you're in Senate, don't talk. Don't talk in Senate unless you have to, especially if it's being recorded. This second one I have to thank Millie Garcia for. When I was in the MLI with some of my colleagues in the room last year with Ask You, she talked about her 4-1-1-1 rule. And it is essentially, I can never remember the specifics of what the 4-1-1 and 1 are, but it's partly about vacation time and taking your vacations and not spending every night and weekend working at your institution. But one of them is it was an hour a day to read and think and learn, and that does not mean reading email. Protect that time in your calendar. Block it out. It's meaningful. And especially after I was listening to I think Lynn Pescarella must have a didactic memory, because the way she was just rattling off all of the things that she's read, my reading list just got a whole lot longer. Consider the consequences of not doing something, as well as the opportunities involved in not doing something. One of the books that is on my shelf to finish reading, that's also a great episode of Hidden Brain, is called Subtract. And it's essentially the art of doing less. We're all in times right now where budgets are being cut, reorganizations are happening, mergers are happening, many, many challenges facing us in our roles and in higher education. There are sometimes things you have to just say, I can leave this behind for a little while, and that's okay. Assume positive intent and mean it. It's very easy to be cynical, especially when we have our faculty behaving badly archetypes, and we all have them. David, Professor Pedantic, exists on every campus, turns out. But it's really important, I have learned, to really, truly assume positive intent in people and try to think about the fact that we don't know all the things that are happening in people's lives that might manifest in behavior that is inexplicable to us, from a rational perspective. And so when you're having conversations with your colleagues, with faculty, with students, with parents, unpack that. Ask those questions. What's getting in your way? What's behind this? Tell me more, right? And try to think about the positive things that they're trying to bring to the table. Live and lead your values. There are going to be, times when you're going to be asked to do things that don't sit well. And listen to that spidey sense. I have 5 core values that drive everything I do, and they are written on my whiteboard, and I pay attention to those with every decision that I make. And there are some of them that are personal core values: trust, honesty, compassion, empathy, kindness. Some of them are my professional core values, right? Student-centered, mission-driven, fair, equitable, transparent, right? So think about and really truly identify what your core values are, and make every decision through that lens, and you will sleep at night. That's the biggest thing for me, is I know that when I go to bed, I've made those decisions through my core values, and I'm going to sleep fine, Tuesday night notwithstanding. Know your why and your full circle moments. Carolyn, you talked about this in your session the other day, right? And especially as we're thinking about moving through other positions of leadership, you need to be able to articulate why you want to be in that role. And if you can't articulate that in a way that comes from your core values, go back and think about it some more before you put in that application. You'll see that I have 2 things up here that are bolded. Progress moves at the speed of trust. So when I started this position at Chico State, I was paired with a senior provost in the system, Michael Spagna, who's now interim president at Humboldt. And in our first one-on-one, that was one of the first things he said to me: progress moves at the speed of trust. And let me tell you, I put that one on my whiteboard too. Because if you're needing to make significant changes in your organization, if that foundation of trust doesn't exist, you're not going to get there. And you're at least not going to get there in a way that protects your leadership. So really take the time, invest in the time to build the relationships that you need to build with your colleagues, with your faculty especially. And don't be afraid. This is one I learned literally just 2 weeks ago. I tried something for the first time that was terrifying, and it turned out to actually be great. I leaned into having a real conversation with the person who everybody warned me about, like, oh, stay away from that faculty member, like they'll get ya. And she said something to me at a town hall that resonated with me so much about how much she loved the institution, and it brought her to tears, and she felt like she was I'm the 5th provost in 8 years at Chico, and she's been waiting and waiting and waiting for somebody to do something differently. And so after the town hall, I went and I had a conversation with her, and I said, I want to hear more about this. Let's go have a coffee. We haven't had the coffee yet, so stay tuned. But it felt really good, and she felt seen, and she felt heard, and that planted a seed of potential trust that is going to serve all of us down the road. This one is particularly for the women and deans of color in the audience. No is a complete sentence. You do not have to say yes to everything. You're already doing probably more than you need to be, right? And that's related to one that's a little bit down the list, but it is okay to say no, and you don't have to give a reason. Find and leverage your superpowers. How many of you in the audience feel like you know what your superpowers are and how to apply them in your leadership? Good. For those of you who are like this or you're not sure, spend some time thinking about that. I'm actually a really firm believer. I used to be a skeptic of these things, but some of the Gallup strengths, some of the sort of, I guess you'd call them personality tests or whatever, strengths assessments. I've done the Gallup one now twice with a few year span in between, and things have shifted order a little bit, but my top 5 strengths are still pretty much the same as they have been for a long time. And so I've leaned into that and figured out, okay, how do I use that to achieve my goals, both personally and professionally? So spend time thinking about that and incorporate that into what you do every day. Leverage your faculty, expertise, and creativity. I'm doing a big reorg, and some of you already have heard this story. I've charged a working group of faculty, staff, and students, and I gave them some, guiding principles and some basic parameters, but I said, off you go. And that was actually one that I learned from trying it out when I was at Bothell, of charging committees to look at faculty salary equity. Jennifer led a couple of those committees for me, and faculty did great work. And they also get to see that some of this stuff is a lot more complicated and a lot more spicy and juicy than they thought it was, and that these decisions aren't ever made lightly or easily. And there's a lot of creative people out there who really do have good ideas, and that helps you build that trust and helps you get that buy-in. Have your people's back. How many of you feel like you have your provost has your back? That is not enough of you, right? And that is one of the things. Ryan, do I have your back? Yes. And he's not lying, right? Because when I was a dean, I learned after a couple of years that my provost didn't so much have my back. And that made my job a lot harder, although it made me a lot easier to take the job at Chico. But I know how it felt as a dean to feel like my provost didn't have my back. I never want my deans to feel like they don't have my back, and I want the chairs to know that the deans have their backs. How many of you have your chairs' backs? Think about that if you didn't raise your hand, and figure out how to do that and build those relationships. Take care of your own well-being first. You've heard this metaphor 1,000 times. Put your own mask on before helping others. It is super critically important to take care of your physical and emotional well-being, right, Bowman? Yeah. It's, the body, it's written on the body, right? The body tells the story. And if you don't take care of yourselves physically and emotionally, your body's going to do it for you in ways that you're not going to appreciate. It was great. I slept in this morning. I went for a nice long swim. I ate my weight in chilaquiles, which may be counterproductive in the end, but they were delicious and totally worth it. This is one that I just learned about. Gloria, are you still here? This came up at the ACE meeting last week. I asked a question about so one of our cabinet norms at Chico is I bring me to the table. And some of you know, if I bring too much of me to the table, that can be a little problematic. And so we had a wonderful panel of presidents, and I asked a question about, how do you balance bringing me to the table with showing up as professional and poised and polished and provostian or presidential or deanian, if that's even a word. And the answer was a revelation to me. It's knowing how to code switch, right? In different spaces, it's okay to bring more of me to the table. And in some spaces, it's better for me to bring my best me to the table. And so that's that last bullet, too, about being your best authentic self. You don't have to give up who you are, but it maybe wasn't a great idea for me to drop an F-bomb at a dinner with my Senate chair the other night, right? And also recognize your own humanity and fallibility, and it's okay to make mistakes. Just be willing to apologize. Okay, we got some stuff coming. The cover on the left is from the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation chaired by the esteemed Ted Cruz, who just won re-election. DEI, division, extremism, and ideology, how the Biden-Harris NSF politicized science. This theme is part of Project 2025 in terms of how do we unfund science that has any equity initiatives connected to it. So we're going to really have to help our faculty, and I'm sure that the NSF grants aren't going to be the only ones. It's going to be NIH, it's going to be Department of Education, it's going to be Health and Human Services, you know, all of the Title III grants, right? It's coming. And we're going to have to figure out how we help support our faculty to be able to successfully get these grants in this environment for the next few years. And some of it is going to have to be probably some level of code switching about how do we incorporate the work we know we need to do into these grants without triggering, you know, the AI review of we're looking for these key words in your grant proposal, and if we find them, it's just like, nope. So we're going to have to think about how we meet the moment. The work is not going to stop. We have to keep thinking about how we do this and how we talk about it, especially for those of us, for those of you who are in you know, regions and states where it's going to be more difficult than others. Because ultimately, all of that trickles down and harms our students. Particularly, you know, you saw the, you know, the demographic talk yesterday. Almost the entire country is going to be filled with Hispanic serving institutions because that's the demographic that's growing fastest across the country. And so we need to be thinking about how we meet this moment to continue to serve all of our students, our rural students, our first generation students, our Black students, our Hispanic students, our Asian American Pacific Islander students, our students from low income neighborhoods and under-resourced schools. They're all still out there and they all still need what we are trying to provide for them, and it's going to get harder. And I'm gonna ask you to not give up. I'm going to really quickly go through all the animations. This is not my slide. This is an EAB slide from one of their future visioning talks. And the basic premise here is that there's this unseen threat below the surface that is the math shark. And if you look at, I wish I had my distance glasses on, but if basically what we're looking at here is college readiness at different levels for students who are currently in the pipeline, right? So college first year students, ninth graders, right? So students who will be in their first year in college in fall of 2027, and current fifth graders who will be in their first year of college in fall of 2031. And what you can see here is, and I'll share the slides after this, and I can share some other resources from EAB if folks are interested in it. Many fewer of our students will be college math ready. So I don't think it's going to be just 10 years that we're dealing with the impacts of COVID. I think it's going to be at least 15. Many fewer students ready for college math when they get to their first year, and the equity gaps get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so how do we prepare for that now? How do you reach back into those K through 12 schools? And doing it at ninth grade isn't going to cut it. We need to be reaching back to the third, the fourth, the fifth graders to figure out how do we support our local and regional schools to get these students back up to pre-COVID and better than pre-COVID math readiness levels. How we do this work is we remember our why. So we had, in the CSU, we had a symposium a couple of weeks ago that was wrapping up our Graduation Initiative 2025. And we had some breakout sessions where we were asked in small groups to start to define what do we mean by student success moving forward for the CSU. And what I have on the screen here is the definition of student success that my small group came up with. And I was fortunate enough to sit at a table with 4 amazing presidents in the CSU. So like that was just mind-blowing because they're all great. So, you know, this is very personal for me. You all, I'm sure, have your own personal definitions and your institutional definitions. But I encourage you to come up with, for yourself, a definition of student success for the next couple of generations. And for me, it is ensuring the ability of every student to embrace their identities, bring them into being as they discover their passions, craft their pathway with the active and intrusive support of faculty and staff, and graduate on their best timeline to decide their own future. We talk all the time about 4-year graduation rates and 6-year graduation rates. We were talking in a session yesterday about, you know, what is our graduation rate goal, right? Well, we know that not every student is going to graduate from our university. That doesn't mean that they haven't transferred and graduated from someplace else. That doesn't mean that they haven't gone on to do something else to be successful. So how do we focus on the students that we're losing for the wrong reasons, right? And we can't do that if we don't know what we mean by success. And ask your students, what do they think student success means? What does it mean to them? And how do we manifest that in our systems? And I put the picture on the left up here because it's one that gives me so much hope. A few months ago during the park fire in California, Chico State proper was fine. We were not threatened, but our big Chico Creek Ecological Reserve was burned to the ground. And there were a couple of historic structures that were lost. We had to go back in and re-protect some indigenous grave areas and cultural areas and archaeological sites and things like that. But this little milkweed popped up just a couple of weeks after the fire. And the Ecological Reserve is already in a rebirth, a phoenix rising from those ashes. And so I'm going to be keeping this little milkweed in the forefront of my thinking over the next 4 years. Because some of us, not all of us, but some of us, feel like something was burned to the ground on Tuesday. But it's going to rise from the ashes. We are going to rise from the ashes. We are not going to give up. And I also just want to end with some inspirational folks who are going to help keep me going, not only in the next 4 years, but for the rest of my career, right? All of these things ebb and flow. They're cyclical. We're always going to have challenges. And so how do we keep going? What gets you up in the morning and gets you going to work and feeling energized and inspired? Obviously, RGB is one of my faves. Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. That can be a superpower. Obviously, never, never, never give up. We will never give up. We will never give up on our students. We will never give up on our institutions. And I think Gloria stepped out, and I'm going to quote her. This also came out of a question that came out of the ACE Women's Leadership meeting in Northern California last week. I asked, I guess I was prescient at that moment. I asked, what do we do if Vice President Harris doesn't win? And we know that there are going to be impacts to higher education. And she said, focus on the greater good, the long-term impact, and the legacy that faculty can have. Support your faculty to do the great work that they do for our students. I mentioned Lynn talking about telling your origin story. Tell your origin story. And then, of course, the great Maya Angelou, you may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. We will rise. Our students will rise. They will do brilliant and amazing things, and that is what gives us hope. And then just from the other day, I really loved this concept of anti-fragility being beyond resilience or robustness, that the anti-fragile gets better. You know, we've had lots of conversations over the last many years about being anti-racist. I want to be anti-racist, and I want to be anti-fragile, and I want to be anti-misogynist. That's my mission. And so with that, so long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye. It's been a hell of a journey. I love this organization. I'm going to miss it, and all y'all better keep in touch. And if I can be of any help or support along your own leadership journey, I'm just a phone call away. And while it sort of terrifies me, we do have time for questions if anybody has any. I'm happy to answer questions or be heckled.
I won't heckle you, but I will thank you for the leadership that you've shown the CCAS this past year. And I'm personally grateful that I found my way to CCAS, and that has allowed me to have that friendship with you, and you've influenced my career and become a good friend, so thank you for that as well. And just as a piece of encouragement too, you may have seen this morning or last night, the California Community College president, the UC president, and the CSU president all issued a joint statement, which I thought was very, very impactful and very positive about what's going on in the country, and just reassuring our students that we've got their back, yes, one way or the other. So again, thanks, and it is going to be okay.
Thank you, Tom. And I agree with you. It is going to be okay. It is going to be okay. Well, thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day and get outside and enjoy this beautiful Austin weather. I'm going to go change into my jeans and flip-flops and go for a walk.